Good afternoon, MuMum here, just dropping by for my Monday musing. It is just me today. There is no MuMan hiding behind me in fits of hysterics. He's at work today, although we have had a few requests to feature him more regularly, so I'm sure he'll be back and you will see him again. We've taken that on board and he'll, I'm sure, make a few more ridiculously hysterical appearances. My musing today for my solo view is around World Prematurity Day, which was last week, and as you will have seen, we, as well as many others, posted about World Prematurity Day and about the nurses and the great care they provided and all of that kind of stuff. And that's what most people kind of commented, that's what most people posted about last week, and rightly so. But I wanted to bring you a slightly different perspective on it today, and this was prompted actually as I was going to bed last night. We have a gallery wall that runs up our staircase, so we've got hundreds of photographs, and right at the top, just before you get to our bedroom, right in the middle of the wall in eye view, is a picture that MuMan took the day after our girls were born, and it's a close-up picture of one of our girls holding one of my fingers, and it's a beautiful picture in its own right, but it holds a lot of sentimental memory to me that makes it even more special, and that's what prompted this kind of little thought process. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the story of why that picture is so sentimental to me and what happened when our girls were born. Our girls were 5 weeks early. I was induced because there were concerns about them. So they weren't massively premature, but they were very tiny when they eventually arrived. They were just a couple of pounds, and I've never seen a human being so small. So they weren't massively prem, and thankfully for us, amazingly so, they didn't need very much intervention. They weren't poorly, they were just very tiny and had to be warmed up and fattened up a little bit, which is why we spent a few weeks in neonatal. So compared to some, our story is not anywhere near as traumatic. But basically our girls were born and they were, so I birthed them, and they were kind of checked over and everything, and I did get to spend a little bit of time with them. I got to hold each one of them separately from memory, and MuMan held the other one while I was holding one, and then they were fairly swiftly taken away. They were taken off to neonatal by the neonatal nurses, and MuMan actually went with them initially, and eventually I was tidied up and all that kind of stuff, and I was then left on my own in the labour ward in the room we'd been in, which is very, very surreal. I can still remember it now, and actually all of a sudden I'd given birth to two little people who we had been wanting and expecting and longing for them to come, and they arrived and then they were taken away, and all of a sudden I was on my own, and it was very strange. It was not like the stories that I'd been told before. It was not like the experiences friends have had where you birth a child and then they're with you, they're yours, your mum, and they are then with you from the minute they come into this world. They're your responsibility, they sleep next to you, all of that kind of stuff. That isn't the same when you have a premature baby or a baby that's poorly. And so I was left on my own, and actually I went into shock, and MuMan, when he eventually came back, that's how he found me. He actually found me in a state of shock, and eventually we got all cleaned up and found our room where we were sleeping. We actually shared a single hospital bed that night, which was interesting. The girls slept somewhere else, and we were on postnatal, they were on neonatal, and we did go and see them before we went to bed, but that was at about midnight, and then we went to bed and slept, and then the next morning we got up and we went over to neonatal, and that's when that picture was taken. And actually when that picture was taken, what you don't see in the picture is that I absolutely lost it and was in floods of tears and had this surge of kind of hormonal emotion. And why that's so important to me is because that was the first time I had a surge of emotion about our girls. And that didn't happen to me when they were born. People talk about this gush and this rush of love that you have when you first hold your child. I didn't get that. I don't think that everybody gets that, but nobody had told me that before, because I was handed these one by one. I was handed these two very small little beings, and my first thoughts, I remember thinking, were just about how tiny they were and how kind of strange they looked, almost because I'd never seen a person so small before, and there was no fat on them. And that was my initial thought process, and then quickly surrounded by what on earth was going on around me. And I didn't get that rush of emotion. And then they were taken away and somebody else got to dress them for the first time. Yes, the nurses were wonderful and they cared for our girls, but actually I struggled with some of the nurses because they got to dress our girls for the first time. They got to do stuff with our girls that I wanted to do. And those are the real emotions that go with being a mum of a prem baby, or babies in our case, or a poorly baby. And actually, that is interesting that last week, when World Prematurity Day, I didn't see any of those kind of posts or feelings. Like I said, a lot of the posts were about how wonderful the nursing staff were and all that kind of stuff. And they are. And I think, you also see posts about how hard it is for parents who have babies or children who have to stay in neonatal for a long time and who have to have huge amounts of intervention. I think, a lot of the videos you see, it's implicit that that must be really tough for the parents. Thankfully, we never had to leave our girls in hospital. We actually got to stay on the neonatal ward. So I can't talk about that. I didn't experience any of that. I can only imagine how hard that is to have to actually leave the hospital and leave them there. But I just wanted to raise this one bit about when you first have a baby, or for us, when you first have babies who are prem and who need that extra intervention, and they're taken off you, and you don't get the same experience that a mum does who's birthed a healthy baby. It's different and it's painful. And weeks and months later, it came to light that I was carrying a huge amount of emotion around those first few hours. I felt guilty that I hadn't done those things with them. I felt like I'd let them down. I felt like they would feel that I'd let them down because I wasn't there in the first couple of hours. All of this crazy emotion that actually had a massive impact on me and impacted how I was with other people around our kids. I got very kind of protective over them, and lots of things happened, and thankfully I was able to recognize that and deal with it quite soon. Like I said, kind of weeks, months really after they were born, I was able to deal with all those emotions and kind of work through them. If I hadn't, I think that would still impact me today and my relationship with the girls. So that's my thinking for today. And I would just encourage you, if you've been through any of that, if you have any emotions or thoughts about it, if you've experienced similar things when your kids were born, then I would encourage you to deal with it. I'd encourage you to talk about it. I'd love to hear some of your experiences. If this has kind of struck a chord with you, then please share it with other mums. Hopefully it will kind of help them to realise that actually that is a really important bit. Everyone will have gone on a different journey with their premature babies after that, but those first few moments, especially if you're becoming a mum for the first time, I think it's a really tough scenario, and I don't think that is talked about or acknowledged enough. Nobody, no professional, no medical person, no midwife, no anybody ever talked to me about those first few minutes or hours after the girls are born and then taken away from me. So that's my hope with this post, is that it just kind of lets you know that someone else has experienced it. And I will leave it there. Like I said, please share, please comment, tell me your story. I'd love to hear it, and I'll be back next week. Okay, bye bye.